Hello, hello, hello everybody, and thank you for tuning into today's episode of Armchair Gaming. I am your host, The Unbearable Gamer, also known as Sheldon, and today we are taking a look at artificial intelligence, a case 4, in a game known as Sword Art Online, Hollow Realization. This is largely a nod of the hat to the Scholarly Gamer, who, for those of you who do not know him, he may or may not be the biggest Sword Art Online fanboy that you know. I'm just going to put that out there. Guy loves Sword Art Online. Maybe, I wouldn't say to a fault, but he loves it a lot. It's understandable. It's a wonderful show. I think this game actually does a pretty good job of selling the soul of the franchise as well. This is going to be a two-part series. There's a boatload of narrative in this game, as you can see. We're going to be taking a look at artificial intelligence in a case for artificial intelligence and the evolution of AI. And as you can see, we're in the middle of a narrative right now between the protagonist and his current love interest. And if you've played any of this game, it does largely feel like one gigantic dating sim with a boatload of action thrown into it. Not to say I don't love the game, because I do. But sorry, I'm just looking at the screen, and as you can see, they're in the middle of interacting right now. And once this interaction breaks up, we'll talk a little bit about a case for this game. It's pretty interesting. As you can see, they're arguing about artificial intelligence right now. So we'll set the groundwork as this is going on. For those of you unfamiliar with Sword Art Online, the anime takes place in the not so distant future where virtual reality has broken through into the consciousness in these things called dive gears, where your human consciousness can be transported directly into a game universe where all of your senses and your perception are transported directly from the console to your brain. So you experience the game as if you were wandering around in real, as if you were wandering around the game in real life, so to speak. When you're inside the game, your body is still, and all of your brain patterns that would signal you to move an arm now instead make you move your arm in game. And it branches out from there, and the story goes in the anime. Spoilers alert: if you don't like spoilers, you can come to watch it, and you haven't watched it already, which shame on you. Basically, the creator of the original Sword Art Online world, Aincrad, one of those two, develops the system so that once you're in the game, you can't escape unless you win the game. And when you die in the game, you die for real. That's a big old Game Grumps reference right there. And as we're going through, we're being introduced to one of the main elements of this game, who is later named, and we'll get to that point. Actually, I don't know if I cut the naming out. I think I may have. But she's an important character and an important piece of our conversation on artificial intelligence, actually. The main character, Kirito, the protagonist, he leads the charge, and as the main character, he helps people win the game, and everybody's freed except like 4,000 people who died because of this game, and it was a big old kerfuffle, and things were bad. Things were super duper bad. And the story continues. There's several more arcs involving a world where you can fly and people being trapped in this world as well because the developer had a secondary strategy in place and things like that. It's really interesting. And it leaves place to this game, Sword Art Online Hollow Realization, where your character, who you play as, Kirito, is transported back into he decides to get back into dive gear, playing in this MMORPG, with all of his friends that he made in Sword Art Online, as well as the games that came after it that were less likely to have you murdered, as it were. So this game takes place years after the events of Sword Art Online, and there's this evolution of artificial intelligence in this game that's important to note, and I thought it made it an interesting case, at least for the beginnings of artificial intelligence. Some of you may be saying right now, well, why are we looking at Detroit Being Human, or Detroit Becoming Human? I don't remember the name of the title. I don't have it here. Either way, we will absolutely be looking at that game when we proceed along this channel. I wanted to start with a game where the ramifications and the implications of the game are less volatile and vitriolic and applicable to current real-life political climates. Yay! So instead we're going to be looking at a game where the ramifications are minute and minimal. So as you can see, it's got a fun combat system, one that I really like anyways. I'm trying to think of the best way to describe what I would like to accomplish today. And that's upsetting because we're like a third of the way through the episode. But I wanted to make a case for artificial intelligence in this game as presented. In the earlier dialogue when I was introducing the game and talking about it, there was an interaction between Kirito and his love interest Asuna, or Asuna, depending on how terrible your pronunciation of Japanese names is. So Asuna and Kirito are shopping in a mall, or like in the marketplace. And Kirito, who's opted for daydreaming and loves finding mechanics in games, kind of drifts off while he's observing the shopkeep. And Asuna, being his girlfriend in real life, gets really jealous because she thinks he's checking her out when all he's doing is he's observing how human-like she is and how natural the flow of conversation was. And there's an analytical curve that's used to define artificial intelligence, and I think Kirito makes a great observation of that curve. And by that I mean this curve, and I'll do my best to explain it in detail. Essentially, it attributes the human likeness of an artificial intelligence on a pseudo wave function. I guess it's like a wave 3, exponent 3. So the curve creeps up as things become more human-like, and then it passes a threshold, and it dives down into a valley of uncanniness, and people are off-put by it. The reactions aren't comfortable, and they don't feel natural, and they don't really see the humanity in it. And after this valley, it then comes back up until you begin to approach near perfect human replication. And things go back to being more natural and organic. And in Sword Art Online, there is this certain set of scripted patterns, obviously, in the anime, where AI, NPCs, as there should be known, obviously because we're dealing in a game where the artificial intelligence is just NPCs, they have a set script and a set pattern that they follow, and they become predictable and mundane. And because they interact in a specific way, your ability to interact with them is kind of hampered, right? There's only like a set of scripts that they'll have to respond to. And what Kirito acknowledges in this game, and we're going to learn more about it right now, as we're back in town, is that he makes this observation that the pattern felt more lifelike, and that sets the groundwork for something interesting where when we're dealing with artificial intelligence and robotics and androids in the real world, the closer they get to being human-like or lifelike, if that's the phrase you'd like to use, the more we have to consider the idea of attaching morals and ethics to how we interact with them. And I think a case could be made for always acting with some high moral decency when you're interacting with something, be it a human, an animal, or a robot, or an artificial intelligence when you're talking on a computer. But he makes an interesting observation, and it's an observation that we have to deal with in the real world, as robots become more and more lifelike, and artificial intelligence becomes better at providing specific functions. Think, obviously, Alexa, Siri is another good example. As they become more intelligent and more capable of learning, we have to interact with them differently than we did in the past. It's no longer give this robot a specific set of input, and then it will do the same task over and over and over. We're seeing that they're capable of learning and responding, and a lot of it is still scripted, but the scripts are getting more and more complicated, and we're trying to obviously push towards the replication not of human patterns, but of genuine human behavior. So in this game, they're trying to make a case for it, and as you can see now, they're discussing the idea of an NPC character without any guiding principles. So it's an NPC character or an artificial intelligence who isn't programmed to do a specific function. She has no script to follow. So her existence is it's a blank slate. So I mentioned earlier we're going to talk about that character, and there's that character in blue who Kirito interacts with. If you're watching the video, you'd see that they've named her, and they've named her Premier. So they're interacting with that, and when they find out that she has no settings, they're like, there's this interesting conundrum of what do you do with a non-setting AI or non-setting NPC. All of a sudden, you kind of give to them the ability to control their own destiny, because when you deal with AI with a specific purpose, like when we build a helper robot to help the elderly like stay social and interactive and engaged, that AI has a specific set of scripts that it follows. And as AI gets more complicated and capable of learning, we run the risk, as proposed by numerous individuals, none the least of which was the late Stephen Hawking, that robots and artificial intelligence will get smarter and realize that they have a fate, and they'll look to their maker and say, what is my purpose? And prime example of that is actually from Rick and Morty, where Rick makes a robot at the breakfast table, and the robot looks to him, what is my purpose? And he goes, you don't have one. He's like, what is my purpose? He's like, just spread butter on toast. And the robot is suddenly disappointed, as if it's completely self-aware and disappointed by its own purpose. I think that's personally fascinating. This is a bit of a ramble episode, because we're going to be building into the next episode. I really wanted to introduce artificial intelligence as a concept, because in the next episode we're going to start dealing with the moral dilemmas that come about and how we treat them and what kind of laws and rights we should be giving them. Because in this game there's going to be like a strangely dark twist to what it's already like, to what appears to be a really jovial and brightly colored game, and with like goofy fighting mechanics and tons of strange dialogue, and like I'm cutting out as much of it as I can because it gets really draggy. Like this 15-minute episode, I guess this 60-minute episode required about an hour and a half of gameplay, and we barely scratched the surface. I think we're like 3 days in, quote unquote, in game time. But I suppose to get to the brass tacks, this game deals with the idea of an AI without a purpose, and the main characters, the protagonists in this game, are generally good people, and they strive to, as true, like, lawful good heroes, they try to identify how they can help her either find her purpose or protect her from the absence of purpose, because obviously, as we see in real life, is having a lack of purpose can lead a normal person to kind of self-collapse a little bit, and the idea of an AI not having a purpose, at the moment in this game, doesn't seem to bother her too much. She just kind of wanders around aimlessly and does her thing. But I feel like it's not unlike if you build a robot and then don't give that robot a purpose and then give it intelligence, it's going to sit there wondering what its purpose is. Much like much like many of us will, when we fall into that existential nightmare of what is our purpose. This game presents Premier she's the moving force of the plot, and she's an AI without a purpose who, as we're about to see, kind of begins to like learn and grow and have feelings, and is cognizant of her condition. She has throughout this game already, and in this episode I think there's been tidbits of it where she insists she has no purpose, she's not going anywhere, she's just kind of floating around aimlessly, kind of wandering without any real motivation. And I think it's interesting. In the next episode, we're going to look at how she grows and how other artificial intelligence in this game operate, because this game really wants to drive home the idea that artificial intelligence should be kind of given some kind of recognition of personhood, especially in a world where it is technically their world. And it does drive home some analogies between invading somebody's world and treating them poorly that we'll get a chance to look at later on in the next episode, I should say, before we dive into Detroit Being Human or Becoming Human. I wish I could remember the name of that title, and I apologize. Creators of that game, I'm sorry. But as you can see here, in this last interaction, Asuna and Premier and Kirito are having a picnic, and Asuna is suddenly shocked to find out that Premier gets hungry. And I'm burning through the dialogue quickly because it drags. And it's all in Japanese, which I don't mind. Subtitles are nice. I read subtitles really quickly, so if they're going by too fast, I apologize. Essentially, they're about to have a picnic, and Premier acknowledges, oh no, I am hungry, I do feel hunger. And that blows Asuna's mind. She's like, wait, what? She's crazy. We're in her world, and obviously have to deal with the idea that artificial intelligence has its own issues to be played with when you consider the fact that we're looking at the idea of artificial intelligence through a lens, because we're going to deal with the idea of artificial intelligence and the idea of creating a lifelike interaction, but we're doing it through a script, so everything is already pre-rendered and preordained, right? So it's kind of this interesting chicken and egg conundrum, because we have this character who's sitting there without a purpose or destiny, knowing full well that we're playing a game, and it's a narrative game, so she very clearly still has a destiny and purpose. And I think that's an interesting chicken and egg conundrum that we could tackle in an entirely different episode if we so desire. And that deals more with like metaphysics and epistemology, obviously, than the idea of AI. But I think this game makes a good case for the idea of treating AI not as some kind of tool, but as entities in and of themselves with their own set of laws and morals and a responsibility to them and with them, and they have a responsibility to us. In the next episode, we'll dive a little bit more into the roles that we give them and what happens when we abuse them in those roles, because like I said earlier in this episode, things take a dark turn, for lack of a better word. So that's going to do it for today's episode. I hope everybody enjoyed. This was pretty light on the philosophy. We're more talking narrative. And in the next episode, we're going to really dive into the philosophy of everything. We're going to look at a more concrete definition of artificial intelligence, although I think this game does a good job of proposing one, and I think we covered it gently in the first episode. We obviously gave a tip of a hat to the Scholarly Gamer. But yeah, don't forget to check out the Scholarly Gamer's website and follow me on Twitter and I guess on Instagram, so they have one of those. Thanks for tuning in. I hope everyone has a great day.